The airport buzzed with the usual chaos, announcements echoing overhead, hurried footsteps tapping against the polished floors, and impatient sighs filling the air. But near gate 23, a different kind of tension hung thick. A woman stood there, cradling her young son in her arms, her face flushed with desperation. She wore a modest, slightly worn-out coat, the kind that had seen many seasons, and her hands trembled as she clutched a passport and a boarding pass. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the airline agent said with an air of finality, arms crossed. "You can't board this flight." The mother's voice cracked. "But I have a ticket, please, my son and I need to get home." The agent barely spared her a glance. "There was an issue with your booking. Unless you can pay an additional fee, you'll have to step aside." Murmurs rippled through the surrounding passengers, some casting sympathetic glances, others looking away, uncomfortable. The woman swallowed hard, glancing at her son, his small fingers clinging to her collar, his sleepy eyes fluttering open. I don't have any more money," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. The agent sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "Then I suggest you find another way home." And just like that, she turned away, dismissing her as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. A slow hush spread through the crowd. And then, a voice, deep and steady, cut through the tension. "That's not how you treat people." Heads turned. Standing just a few feet away, dressed in his signature all-black attire, was Keanu Reeves. His dark eyes held a quiet intensity, his posture relaxed yet commanding. He wasn't loud, didn't need to be. The agent blinked, caught off guard. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." Keanu took a slow step forward, his gaze never wavering. "Actually," he said, voice calm yet unshakable, "it does." Silence. The mother's breath hitched. The agent hesitated. The other passengers watched, eyes wide, as an ordinary moment at an airport transformed into something much bigger. And just like that, the battle had begun. The airline agent straightened her posture, her initial surprise fading into a cool, professional demeanor. She glanced at Keanu Reeves as if evaluating whether he was worth the trouble. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her tone shifting into something polite but firm, "I respect your concern, but this is an internal matter. We follow strict airline policies, and I can't make exceptions." Keanu remained still, his expression unreadable. "What policy says a mother and child should be left stranded when they have a ticket?" The agent exhaled sharply, forcing a practiced smile. "Sir, the airline reserves the right to refuse boarding under certain circumstances. This woman's ticket has an issue, and unfortunately, she doesn't meet the requirements to board at this time." The mother flinched at the words, tightening her grip on her son. The boy, barely awake, nestled closer to her chest, sensing her distress. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "What kind of issue?" The agent hesitated, then adjusted the collar of her uniform. "It's a fair discrepancy," she said finally, her voice clipped. She booked a discounted ticket, but due to a policy change, she now needs to pay an adjustment fee. If she can't fly. A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Keanu tilted his head slightly. "So, you're telling me that after she bought her ticket in good faith, you changed the rules?" The agent crossed her arms. "Sir, the rules are in place for a reason. If we start making exceptions, we lose order." Keanu let that hang in the air for a moment before speaking again, his voice still composed. "And you think denying a struggling mother the ability to go home with her child is order?" The agent's expression tightened. She knew she was losing control of the conversation, but she wasn't ready to back down. Instead, she changed tactics. "Mr. Reeves," she said, taking a measured step forward, lowering her voice slightly as if speaking to an uninformed bystander, "I understand you're a public figure, and I admire your generosity. But you need to see the bigger picture here." She gestured vaguely toward the counters, the uniformed staff, the passengers waiting in line. Airlines operate under strict protocols. If we let one person board without meeting the requirements, what's stopping everyone else from demanding the same? Would you like to be responsible for causing a disruption? Keanu studied her for a moment. Then, he did something unexpected. He smiled, just barely, but enough for it to be noticed. The agent's confidence flickered for the briefest second. "I think you're asking the wrong question," he said. The agent frowned. "Excuse me?" Keanu took a slow step forward, closing the distance slightly. The weight of his presence seemed to shift the energy in the room. "You're asking if I want to be responsible for breaking your system," he said, voice calm but firm. "But what you should be asking is, do you want to be responsible for enforcing an unjust one?" The agent opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For a moment, just a moment, she looked unsure. Then, as if shaking herself free from whatever spell had been cast over the moment, she straightened. "I don't make the rules, sir," she said quickly. "I just follow them." Keanu's gaze held hers. "That's convenient." The agent stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" He didn't raise his voice. Didn't break his composed exterior. But the words hit their mark. The agent's face flushed slightly, and she glanced around, as if seeking backup. But the gathered passengers weren't on her side. They were watching Keanu, waiting for what he would say next. The shift had begun. A heavy silence hung in the air. The airline agent's confidence wavered, but she quickly composed herself. Adjusting her uniform, she squared her shoulders and let out a small, forced laugh. "Mr. Reeves, you're making this far more dramatic than it needs to be," she said, trying to sound amused, but the tension in her voice betrayed her. "We're not talking about life and death here. It's just a policy issue. This woman can simply take another flight when she has the funds." Keanu let the words settle. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, observing her with quiet intensity. Then, after a pause, he spoke, his voice as calm as ever. "Do you have children?" he asked. The agent blinked. "What?" Keanu remained still, his gaze unwavering. "Do you have kids?" The agent hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "I don't see how that's relevant." He let out a slow breath. "It's relevant because if you did, you'd know that sometimes, just take another flight isn't an option. Sometimes, a mother isn't traveling for leisure, she's traveling because she has nowhere else to go." The agent pressed her lips together, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Mr. Reeves, this isn't about personal feelings. It's about fairness." Keanu raised an eyebrow, his expression thoughtful. "Fairness," he repeated, as if tasting the word. He took a step closer, not threateningly, but with purpose. The crowd around them had grown, watching in silence, captivated by the exchange. "You talk about fairness," Keanu continued, his voice measured, "but let me ask you this, how fair is it to take someone's money, confirm their flight, and then change the rules at the last minute?" The agent opened her mouth but hesitated. Keanu pressed on. "Is it fair to deny a mother and child their journey home because of a hidden fee?" He gestured toward the woman, whose eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Is it fair to look at her and tell her she's not worth bending the rules for, even when those rules were made to serve people like her?" The agent's fingers twitched slightly at her sides. She was losing control. She exhaled sharply. "Mr. Reeves, if we start making exceptions, where does it stop? Rules are rules for a reason." Keanu studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly, as if he understood her position. "You know," he said, voice gentle but firm, "history is full of people who said, rules are rules while doing things they knew were wrong." The agent tensed. Keanu continued. "In fact, some of the greatest injustices in history happened because people in positions of power refused to think for themselves." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The rules didn't tell Rosa Parks to stay in her seat. Morality did. The rules didn't tell Oskar Schindler to save lives. His conscience did. A murmur rippled through the gathered passengers. Someone whispered, "He's got a point." The agent's face flushed. That's not the same thing." Keanu took a slow step back, giving her space, his voice never rising. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But every moment, we all have a choice, to follow a system blindly, or to do what's right." The agent looked around, suddenly realizing how many eyes were on her. She licked her lips, trying to maintain control. Keanu glanced at the mother and child, his gaze softening. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. "If it's about money," he said, calmly taking out his credit card, "I'll pay." Gasps echoed through the terminal. The mother let out a choked sob, shaking her head. "No, Keanu met her gaze and gave her a small, reassuring nod. The agent swallowed. Her hands tightened into fists at her sides. She was backed into a corner, and she knew it. For a long moment, she simply stood there, her breath unsteady. Then, finally, she turned toward her computer and began typing. Keanu's power shift was complete. The airline agent's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her jaw tight, her breath uneven. She could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on her. The murmurs had grown louder, shifting from idle curiosity to something far more pointed. "Is she really going to deny them now?" a woman whispered. "I mean, come on, it's Keanu Reeves. He's literally paying for her ticket," a man muttered. The agent's frustration was palpable. Her polished, professional demeanor was slipping, replaced by visible irritation. She tapped a few keys, pretending to focus on the screen in front of her, but it was obvious, she was stalling, trying to salvage the situation. Keanu, on the other hand, remained perfectly still. He had already won the room, and he knew it. Slowly, he turned his head, taking in the passengers watching intently. He noticed the older gentleman gripping the handle of his suitcase, leaning forward as if waiting for the final verdict. The young couple holding hands, exchanging impressed glances. The airport staff in the background, whispering among themselves, pretending not to be invested. And then, most importantly, the mother, her lips parted in disbelief, her tired eyes brimming with hope for the first time. The agent finally spoke, her voice clipped, trying to maintain her authority. "Mr. Reeves, this is highly unorthodox." Keanu exhaled, a slow, deliberate breath, before offering her a polite, knowing smile. "You keep saying that," he said gently. "But all I hear is that you're searching for a reason to say no, when all the reasons to say yes are right in front of you." The crowd murmured again, louder this time. The pressure was mounting. The agent's fingers clenched into fists. She wasn't used to being challenged like this, not by a customer, and certainly not in front of an audience. She cleared her throat. "Fine," she said stiffly. "If you insist on paying, I'll process the transaction." A beat. Then, soft gasps, scattered applause. A few people exchanged grins, nodding in approval. Keanu's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered, satisfaction, perhaps, but not triumph. He hadn't set out to win an argument. He had set out to do the right thing. The mother covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Thank you," she whispered. "I don't even know what to say." Keanu turned to her, his voice warm yet quiet. "You don't have to say anything. Just take your son home." The boy, rubbing his sleepy eyes, looked up at him. "Are you a superhero?" he asked in a small, drowsy voice. A soft chuckle rippled through the crowd. Keanu knelt slightly, meeting the child's gaze. He smiled, genuine, kind. "No," he said. "But you don't have to be a superhero to do the right thing." The energy in the terminal had shifted completely. The agent, now fully aware that she had lost, processed the payment in silence. The battle was over. And the world had already chosen its victor. The rhythmic clacking of the agent's keyboard was the only sound filling the tense air. She worked through the transaction with stiff, robotic movements, her shoulders rigid. The once confident enforcer of airline policy now looked like a mere cog in the machine, forced to acknowledge the flaw in the system she had defended so fiercely. Keanu stood still, hands in his pockets, waiting. Not impatiently. Not smugly. Just waiting. The receipt printed with a mechanical whir. The agent ripped it from the machine and slid it across the counter toward Keanu without meeting his gaze. "There," she said, her voice clipped. "It's done." Keanu didn't reach for it right away. Instead, he studied her for a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful, unreadable. Then, slowly, deliberately, he picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and handed it to the mother. "Now," he said gently, "you're free to go." The mother clutched the ticket in disbelief, her lips trembling. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming kindness she had just witnessed. She turned to Keanu, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to." He glanced down at the child still nestled in her arms. "Just take care of him." The little boy, still groggy from sleep, peeked up at him. "You're really nice," he mumbled. Keanu chuckled softly. "I try." The mother hugged her son tightly, then turned toward the boarding gate, her steps lighter than before. The surrounding passengers watched her go, their expressions a mixture of admiration and quiet reflection. The moment should have ended there. But Keanu wasn't done yet. He turned back to the airline agent. She was still standing behind the counter, her arms crossed, her nails digging into her sleeves. She wasn't looking at him, her gaze was fixed somewhere in the distance, her expression unreadable. But Keanu didn't need her to look at him. He knew she had heard everything. He took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough so that only she could hear. "You know," he said, his tone still calm, still gentle, "power isn't in saying no just because you can." The agent stiffened. Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Real power," he continued, "is knowing when to say yes." The words hung in the air, heavier than anything else that had been said that night. The agent finally met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no defiance in her eyes. No frustration. Just thoughtfulness. Keanu gave her a small nod. Not one of victory, but of understanding. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The airport remained silent for a beat. Then, a slow, scattered applause. It started with one person. Then another. Then another. Within moments, the entire waiting area was clapping. Some cheered softly, others simply smiled, nodding in silent agreement. The agent said nothing. She simply stood there, watching Keanu's retreating figure, his words still echoing in her mind. Because deep down, she knew. She hadn't just lost an argument. She had learned a lesson. It started as a single clip, a shaky phone recording from a passenger who had witnessed everything. The video, just over 5 minutes long, showed the entire exchange, the airline agent's rigid stance, the desperate mother clutching her child, and Keanu Reeves standing calm and unwavering in the face of bureaucracy. Within an hour, it had racked up hundreds of thousands of views. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Trending hashtags explode. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok flooded with posts about the incident. The hashtag Keanu wins skyrocketed to the #1 trending spot worldwide. At Flight Justice 101, this is what real influence looks like. Not flaunting wealth, not showing off, just using power to do the right thing. Hashtag Keanu wins. At Mom Life Diaries, crying. Absolutely crying. Imagine being that mother, thinking the world had turned its back on you, until Keanu Reeves stepped in. Humanity isn't dead yet. Hashtag Keanu saves. Celebrities join the conversation. Fellow Hollywood stars weighed in, praising Keanu for his humility and compassion. Chris Evans, at Chris Evans not even surprised. Keanu's been out here being a real-life superhero for years. Hashtag legend. Zendaya, at Zendaya man, if I ever get stuck at an airport, I hope Keanu Reeves is there. Even politicians and activists chimed in, calling for airlines to rethink their customer policies. Bernie Sanders, at Sanders Keanu Reeves did the right thing. But the real question is, why did he have to? It's time to rethink airline policies that punish the most vulnerable among us. News outlets pick up the story. Major media channels covered the viral moment. CNN headline, Keanu Reeves defends struggling mother at airport, a lesson in compassion. BBC, rules are meant to serve people, Keanu Reeves sparks airline policy debate. The New York Times, Keanu Reeves versus airline bureaucracy, a viral moment with a bigger message. YouTube breaks down the moment. Countless YouTube creators uploaded analysis videos, breaking down Keanu's calm demeanor and the psychological power shift in the conversation. Reaction videos showed people tearing up, inspired by his words. And as the internet buzzed with admiration, one comment under the original video stood out, liked over 1 million times. The world doesn't deserve Keanu Reeves. But man, are we lucky to have him. 7. Direct audience engagement, keep viewers hooked, 300 words. And that, my friends, is why Keanu Reeves isn't just a Hollywood legend, he's a real-life hero. But now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in this situation? Do you think airlines should be more flexible with their rules, or was Keanu right to step in? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, it really helps more people see this video. Also, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we have even more jaw-dropping, inspirational, and powerful celebrity stories coming your way. Trust me, you don't want to miss them. Before we wrap up, I have one more question for you. If you could have any celebrity step in to defend you in a tough situation, who would it be? Would you choose Keanu, or someone else? Drop your answer in the comments. Oh, and one last thing, share this video with a friend who needs to see that kindness still exists in the world. You never know whose day you might brighten. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.